On my mother's 64th birthday, she smiled at a room full of people and told me the best gift I could give her was to disappear from her life. The words didn't even land at first. They seemed to float through the warm hum of conversation and clinking glasses bouncing around the crowded living room like a joke no one wanted to laugh at. The air smelled of roasted chicken and vanilla frosting. The house glowed with soft yellow light from the antique lamps Vera insisted on polishing every week, a light that made everyone else look comfortable, welcome. I stood near the dining table holding the cake knife in my damp hand, pretending my pulse wasn't thudding hard enough to shake the floorboards. She'd been dropping small barbs all evening. That was nothing new. The jokes about how I never left Vermont about my job at the library, as though it were a hobby rather than the thing that paid the bills. She even criticized the way I'd decorated for the party, laughing loudly when she noticed the crooked banner. Marin's idea of festive. She'd told our cousin Lori, who chuckled dutifully, not meeting my eyes. I'd kept busy ferrying drinks and making sure the appetizers didn't burn the same way I had for every other event Vera hosted in this house. But this was different. Her voice carried over the music as she made her toast. She held her glass high, her lipstick perfect, the diamond on her left hand catching the light like a signal flare. I tried to focus on her words, on her thin wrists, and the familiar way she commanded a crowd, but then she looked straight at me and dropped the line that sliced through my ribs. The best gift I could give her was to disappear. The room froze. Someone coughed. A fork clattered against a plate. I didn't move. I had spent so many years swallowing comments like that, telling myself they didn't mean what they sounded like. But tonight, with the cake frosting hardening under the kitchen lights and the voices of neighbors I'd known since childhood rustling like leaves around me, the truth lodged sharp in my chest. She had said it in front of everyone, and she meant it. My eyes flicked instinctively to the guests. Elaine Darnell, the neighbor who always waved from across the street, stood in the corner with her hands clasped, her expression unreadable. Lori shifted uncomfortably beside Vera, taking a long sip of wine. Nobody spoke up. Nobody told my mother she had gone too far. "Mom!" I started, my voice low, but she just smiled wider, like this was her moment, like I was the punchline she had been building toward all evening. "Don't take it so seriously," she said lightly, the same tone she used when brushing off my pain as overreaction. She tapped her glass against Lori's and moved on, accepting compliments about the decor I'd stayed up half the night to arrange. I wanted to vanish right then, to walk out the front door and keep walking until my legs gave out. But my feet felt glued to the worn rug, the same rug I used to play on when I was small enough to believe Vera's hugs meant safety. I remembered all the birthdays I'd spent trying to make her happy, hand-sewn gifts as a child, meticulously wrapped presents as an adult. All the hours I'd poured into her house, her parties, her needs, while my own life had quietly withered in the shadows. The conversations around me slowly resumed, but the sound seemed muffled, distant. My gaze settled on Vera as she moved through the crowd, collecting admiration like payment. She looked radiant, satisfied, entirely unbothered by the silence she'd left in her wake. I took a step back, my shoulder brushing the edge of the doorframe. The hum of laughter stung like static in my ears. I wanted to ask her why. Why the cruelty? Why tonight? Why she had to make sure everyone saw me shrink? But I didn't trust my voice not to crack. Instead, I tightened my grip on the cake knife until my fingers ached and tried to breathe around the lump in my throat. The room felt smaller with every passing second, the walls closing in, as if the house itself wanted me gone too. I looked around the room, wondering if anyone would defend me. No one did. That night, I walked back into the house as if I were an intruder. The party had ended hours ago. The once bright rooms now sat in shadows, the lingering smell of wine and frosting clinging to the air like a memory I wanted to scrub away. I closed the door quietly behind me, though there was no one waiting to welcome me home. From the kitchen came faint noises, the clinking of dishes, the rhythmic scrape of a sponge against glass. Vera was still awake, moving about with the same self-assured grace she had carried all night. I slipped off my shoes and padded up the stairs, keeping to the edge of the carpet so it wouldn't creak. Every step felt like trespassing, like I didn't quite belong here anymore. Maybe I never had. In the hallway, the soft glow of a lamp spilled from Vera's study. The door stood half open, and I caught sight of her silhouette bent over a desk, hair perfectly smooth, despite the late hour. My instinct was to knock, to say something, to ask her why she'd said what she did, but my throat tightened and I kept moving. My bedroom door shut with the faintest click. The same room I'd slept in as a child greeted me with its familiar faded wallpaper and narrow twin bed. The shelves still held books I'd once loved, trophies from a youth I could hardly remember. It all felt frozen in time, as though my life had been paused decades ago and never resumed. I sat on the edge of the bed, pressing my palms against my knees to stop them from trembling. My mind kept replaying the scene downstairs. Vera's voice wrapping her insult in honey, the guests' awkward silence, the way no one defended me. A hollow ache settled in my chest, spreading slowly until it filled every corner of me. I thought about the choices I had made for her, the graduate program I'd left when she fell on the ice and broke her hip, the relationship I'd ended because she needed me to stay close, the steady jobs I'd turned down because they required travel. At the time, it had felt necessary, even noble. I told myself I was doing the right thing, but sitting there in that cramped room, I couldn't help wondering if I'd simply disappeared one compromise at a time. A soft thud from the study broke my spiral. The urge to know what Vera was doing gnawed at me, and before I could talk myself out of it, I slipped back into the hall. The study smelled of dust and lemon polish. Papers lay scattered across the desk, neatly stacked in Vera's meticulous style. My eyes caught on the bold black words stamped across several envelopes: estate, trust, beneficiary. I reached out but stopped short, afraid of leaving fingerprints. What was she working on? I crouched to peek at the bottom drawer, which was slightly ajar. Inside was a small pile of bank statements. I eased one free and scanned the lines. My stomach clenched. There were withdrawals I didn't remember authorizing, thousands siphoned out in small increments, the account listed under my name and hers. The numbers blurred as my pulse quickened. How long had this been happening? I put the statement back exactly as I found it, hands shaking. A faint sound from downstairs, the closing of a cabinet, snapped me upright. I slipped out of the study and back into my room, shutting the door and locking it this time. I sat at the desk by the window, staring at the blank journal I hadn't opened in years. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered. Lines traced the corners of my eyes, shadows hollowed my cheeks. I uncapped the pen and pressed it to the paper, unsure where to start. I feel invisible. I wrote slowly, the words jagged and uneven. The sentences came haltingly at first, then faster, a torrent of half-formed thoughts. My sacrifices, the way Vera's approval always dangled just out of reach, the dread that I had no life outside of hers. The journal pages filled with my cramped handwriting until my hand ached. I dropped the pen and leaned back, the room tilting slightly from the rush of it all. I glanced at the door, half expecting Vera to burst in and demand to know what I was doing. But the house was silent now, the noises downstairs gone. I reached for the bank statement I had slipped from my pocket before returning it. The numbers stared back at me, cold and undeniable. Was she preparing to cut me out completely? For the first time in my life, I thought about actually leaving. The thought lodged in my mind as I stacked books at the small-town library 2 days after Vera's birthday party. The library was quiet as usual, a handful of patrons wandering the aisles or reading at the long tables near the windows. The familiar scent of old paper and floor polish wrapped around me, usually a comfort. But today, it felt more like a reminder of how little my life had changed in decades. I was shelving a stack of returns when Elaine Darnell's voice drifted softly from behind me. "You seem far away today." I turned and found her standing a few feet away, holding a paperback novel against her hip. She looked the same as she had the night of the party. Gray hair pulled neatly back her cardigan, buttoned against the September chill. But her expression was softer, tinged with something I couldn't quite read. "I'm fine," I said automatically, forcing a small smile. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I saw the way she spoke to you the other night." My chest tightened. "It's nothing new," I murmured, aligning a stack of biographies that didn't really need straightening. Elaine hesitated before adding, "You're not crazy, Marin. I've seen how she treats you. For years." The words nearly undid me. I gripped the edge of the shelf, blinking hard. "Thank you," I managed. Elaine reached out as if to squeeze my arm but thought better of it, withdrawing her hand. "If you ever need anything," she said, "you know where I am." I nodded, throat thick. It was a small kindness, but it cracked something open. By the time my shift ended, the thought of leaving was no longer fleeting. It was a seed taking root. But I couldn't just walk away. Not without answers. I drove straight to the bank. The building sat on the corner of Main Street, its brick facade as solid and unchanging as the rest of the town. Inside, the air was cool, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The young woman at the counter greeted me with a practiced smile. "Hi, Ms. Whitmore. How can I help you today?" I hesitated, unsure how much to say. I'd like to review my accounts. All of them, and any loans that might be in my name." Her brow furrowed slightly, but she led me to a small office in the back. She pulled up the information on her computer, the screen casting a pale light on her face. "This is odd," she said after a moment, scrolling through the records. "There have been a number of withdrawals. Small amounts at first, but over time, it's added up to quite a bit." My stomach dropped. "Withdrawals? I didn't authorize anything." She clicked into another file. "There's also a personal loan here. Significant amount. It's listed as joint with your mother." I leaned forward, heart pounding. "Can I see the paperwork?" She printed a copy and handed it to me. My eyes scanned the pages, the numbers blurring as I reached the signature line. There it was, my name scrawled neatly in black ink. Only it wasn't my handwriting. The room seemed to tilt. "This isn't mine?" I whispered. The employee's eyes flicked up uneasy. "I'm sorry, Ms. Whitmore, but it's on file as yours." I stared at the paper, my fingers trembling. I could almost see Vera sitting at the kitchen table, her perfect script gliding across the page, confident no one would ever question her. Something inside me hardened. I folded the document carefully, slipping it into my bag. My reflection in the glass door as I left the bank was unfamiliar eyes, sharper jaw set. She was stealing from me, and I had proof. I needed someone who knew the law and wasn't afraid of my mother. 2 nights after leaving the bank with the forged loan documents burning a hole in my bag, I found myself driving through the narrow 2-lane highway to a neighboring town. The early October air was crisp, leaves curling and falling across the windshield as if nature itself was shedding layers. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles pale. I had gone back and forth a dozen times about this part of me, terrified Vera would somehow find out another part, afraid of what I might discover if I kept digging. Tomas Reyes's law office was tucked into a row of brick buildings downtown, its modest sign almost unassuming. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of cedar, a sharp contrast to the cold tension knotted in my stomach. "Ms. Whitmore," the receptionist asked, offering a gentle smile. "Yes." "Marin," I replied, my voice thinner than I'd intended. She ushered me into a small office where Tomas stood to greet me. He was in his 40s, tall and lean, with dark hair just starting to gray at the temples. His handshake was firm but not overbearing, and his gaze was steady. The kind of gaze that made me think he'd seen everything and nothing could surprise him. "Please have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I sat clutching my bag like a lifeline. For a moment, I couldn't find the words. My mind kept flickering back to the image of Vera at her birthday party, the smug tilt of her chin when she'd told me to disappear, as though the thought of erasing me from her life was a gift to herself. Tomas waited patiently, hands folded on the desk. My mother? I started slowly. I think she's been stealing from me. I found withdrawals from our joint account ones I never authorized. And there's a loan, a large one, with my signature on it, only it's not mine. I pulled out the documents from the bank, laying them on his desk with trembling fingers. He scanned each page carefully, brow furrowing deeper with every line. This is substantial, he said finally. How long has this been going on? I don't know, I admitted. Years, probably. She's controlling. I've always lived with her. She handles most of the paperwork, the bills. I just trusted her. Thomas nodded, leaning back in his chair. I understand. And you're not alone in this. The first thing we need to do is separate your finances completely. Close any joint accounts, open new ones only in your name. Do not give her access no matter what she says. I swallowed hard. She'll notice. She might, he said calmly. But you're vulnerable as long as she has access. You need to create boundaries she can't cross. The word boundaries felt foreign, almost naive when it came to Vera. She had never respected them before. Tomas continued. We also need to keep an eye on estate documents and any wills. If your name is being removed, you need to know about it. Removed? I echoed, my chest tightening. He met my gaze. Based on what you're showing me, I wouldn't be surprised if she's rewriting things. It happens more often than you'd think. The thought made my stomach turn. My father's name flickered in my memory, a hazy recollection of the soft-spoken man who died when I was still young enough to believe everything could be fixed with a hug. Thomas leaned forward, voice steady but firm. You don't need a war, Marin. You need a boundary she can't cross. The words landed heavier than I expected, a promise and a warning all at once. I nodded, feeling the faintest stirrings of resolve. Okay, I said quietly. As I left the office, tucking the folder of advice and documents under my arm, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the sidewalk. I reached into my bag for my keys and felt something unfamiliar, a thick, dusty envelope wedged in the bottom corner. I pulled it out, my breath catching. The return address was from a bank I didn't recognize, and the name printed neatly on the front made my knees weaken. Robert Whitmore, my late father. I stared at it for a long moment, the weight of the paper impossibly heavy in my hands. What was this doing in my bag, and why had I never seen it before? She was starting to notice I wasn't the same compliant daughter anymore. The change was subtle at first. I stopped telling her where I was going. I kept my bedroom door locked, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. When she called me from across the house, I didn't always answer right away. And each time I quietly refused to collapse into the old patterns. I could feel her eyes narrowing, calculating. Where have you been all afternoon? She asked one morning as I came through the back door, brushing off leaves from my jacket. Her voice was deceptively light, but the question felt like a blade. Out, I replied, hanging up my coat. Out where? Just out, I said, walking past her toward the stairs. I could feel her glare on my back, sharp and hot. Vera hated unanswered questions more than anything. That evening, I overheard her in the kitchen making phone calls. She kept her voice soft, warm, the way she did when she wanted people to trust her. I'm just worried about her, she said into the receiver. She's been secretive lately. And ungrateful. After everything I've done, I think she's trying to take things from me. You know how vulnerable I am at my age. I stood in the hallway, my stomach twisting as I realized exactly what she was doing, planting seeds, reshaping the narrative before I had a chance to tell my side of it. By the end of the week, it was working. Relatives stopped returning my texts. Neighbors who had waved for years now looked away as I passed. Even at the library, I caught whispers trailing off when I entered a room. The small-town air, once suffocating but predictable, turned poisonous. Elaine was one of the few who still greeted me the same way. She stopped by the library midweek, offering a gentle smile as she returned a stack of books. "She's calling people, isn't she?" I asked quietly as I scanned her returns. Elaine nodded slowly. "I've heard some of what she's saying. It's not kind, Marine. I don't know how to fight her," I admitted, lowering my voice so no one else could hear. "You don't have to fight her in the way she expects," Elaine said softly. "She thrives on control. The more you push back openly, the more she'll tighten her grip. Be careful." Her words settled deep inside me. A few days later, I met Lori for coffee at the small-town cafe on Main Street. She had been one of the few relatives I still felt connected to, so I was hoping naively that she might offer some support. The moment I stepped through the door, I knew I was wrong. Lori was already seated at a corner table, arms crossed, expression hard. "You've really disappointed Aunt Vera," she said as soon as I sat down. My throat tightened. "Lori, you don't know the whole story." "Oh, I think I do," she snapped. "She told me about the bank accounts, how you're trying to take what's hers. She's worked her whole life for that house, Marin, and now you're sneaking around behind her back." The cafe was crowded, and I could feel people at nearby tables watching. My cheeks burned. "That's not what's happening," I said, keeping my voice as even as I could. "Then what is happening?" Lori demanded. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're using her. She's your mother, for God's sake. She took you in when no one else would. And this is how you repay her." The words hit like blows. Around us, cups clinked and chairs scraped, the noise suddenly louder than it had been a moment ago. I swallowed hard. "I'm not going to do this here," I said quietly, pushing back from the table. Lori's voice followed me as I walked out the door, pitched just loud enough for everyone to hear. "If you're not guilty, why are you running away?" The bell above the door chimed sharply as I stepped outside. The cool October wind bit at my face, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm raging inside me. Vera had succeeded in making me the villain in my own town. That night, I returned home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in hand, her expression smug. "People are starting to ask questions about you," she said, without looking up. I stared at her for a long moment, the truth settling like a stone in my chest. She had turned almost everyone against me. I went upstairs and closed my bedroom door softly behind me, my hands trembling, not with fear this time, but with resolve. I whispered to myself, "If she wants a war, she'll get one, but on my terms." She wasn't just planning to cut me out, she already had. Tomas Reyes's office felt colder than I remembered. The mid-October sky outside was steel gray, pressing down on the town, and I felt as if that same weight had followed me into the building. Tomas's receptionist gave me a sympathetic nod as I passed her desk, my stomach coiling tighter with each step. Tomas rose when I entered his office, his expression grave. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Marin," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I received something this morning you need to see." He slid a manila folder across the desk. I opened it with numb fingers and stared at the legal document inside, a newly filed will dated just last week. My name wasn't there. Not anywhere. My breath caught. She actually did it," I whispered. Tomas leaned forward. "She not only removed you, but she had you sign a consent form acknowledging the changes. At least, that's what the document says." I flipped through the pages, my eyes blurring until I reached the signature line. There it was again, that same imitation of my name, steady and practiced, but not mine. "That's a forgery," I said hoarsely, shoving the paper back across the desk. "I know," Tomas said. "But proving it will take time, and we need to build a strong case before we make any moves. If we confront her too early, she'll have a chance to destroy evidence." The room tilted. "I don't understand. She already has the community on her side, and now this. I understand how it feels," Tomas said calmly. "But you're not powerless, Marine. We'll separate your finances completely if we haven't already, and we'll keep tracking every document she files. You're stronger than you think. I shook my head, struggling to find solid ground. She's rewriting history, Tomas. I don't even exist in her world anymore. She's overreaching, he said. That works in your favor. People who forge signatures and manipulate estates eventually leave a trail. I left the office in a daze, clutching the folder like it might anchor me. The late afternoon air bit at my cheeks as I drove to Elaine Darnell's house. Elaine greeted me with her usual quiet warmth, ushering me into the cozy living room that smelled faintly of cinnamon. "You look pale," she said, guiding me to the sofa. "She filed a new will." I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not in it anymore." And she forged my signature on the consent form. Elaine's face softened, her eyes glistening with something like sorrow. "I'm so sorry, Maureen." I twisted the strap of my bag in my lap. "I don't know what else she's hiding. I found an envelope in my bag a few weeks ago. It was addressed from a bank in my father's name. I never opened it." Elaine hesitated, then leaned forward. "Your father. He once mentioned to me that he wanted to set aside a fund for you. Something separate from the house, something that would be yours no matter what." The words hit me like a blow. "A fund," she nodded. "I never knew the details, and he passed not long after. But if Vera knew about it, she would have taken it." I finished for her, bile rising in my throat. Elaine reached for my hand, squeezing gently. "I wish I could tell you more. But if there's a fund, Tomas will find it. He's good at what he does." I nodded, though the certainty Elaine offered felt impossibly far away. "She's already isolated me from everyone else," I said. "If she's stolen that too, my father's last gift, what's left?" Elaine's grip tightened. "What's left is you. And you're not alone, Marin. Not anymore." I tried to believe her as I left her house, the sky now darkening into early evening. But the ache in my chest only grew heavier as I drove home. She wasn't just stealing from me. She'd stolen my father's last gift too. She wanted me out of the house, and she wanted me humiliated first. The demand came one morning in late October over coffee I hadn't asked for, and at a table that didn't feel like mine anymore. Vera slid a document across the kitchen table, her manicured finger tapping the signature line. "This is a simple acknowledgement," she said sweetly. "It just confirms you renounce any future claims to the estate. So there's no confusion later." I stared at the crisp paper, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. "You already cut me out of the will," I said quietly. Her smile didn't falter. "Then signing this shouldn't matter to you." "It matters," I said, pushing the paper back toward her. "I'm not signing anything." Her eyes hardened, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second. "You're making this harder on yourself than it needs to be." I stood and left the kitchen without another word. Upstairs in my room, I locked the door and tried to steady my shaking hands. But she wasn't finished with me. That week, the rumors grew louder. Relatives called less and less, their voices clipped when they did answer. I saw the way neighbors looked at me on the street. Pity and suspicion mingled in their expressions. At the grocery store, a woman I'd known since high school whispered something to her husband as I passed, and they both turned away. I wanted to scream, to confront them all, but I kept my head down, buying only what I needed and leaving as quickly as possible. The isolation deepened at the community center a few days later. I'd gone to drop off donated books from the library, hoping for a sense of normalcy. But as soon as I walked through the doors, the chatter around me dimmed. People turned their backs, conversations dropping to a hush. I spotted my cousin Lori near the coffee table, her arms crossed, her expression as tight as it had been at the cafe weeks earlier. "Lori," I said carefully. She glanced at me, then at the group surrounding her. "I can't talk right now," she said sharply, as though my presence might contaminate her. I felt the sting of shame burning in my cheeks, but I forced myself to remain calm. "You've heard what she's saying?" I said softly. Everyone's heard, she replied, her tone cold. She's your mother, Maureen. If she says you're trying to take advantage of her, maybe you should think about why people believe her. I opened my mouth, but the words died on my tongue. Around us, the room was full of people I'd known my entire life, and not one of them stepped forward to defend me. I left the books on the table and walked out, my head bowed, the weight of their silence crushing me. Back at the house, Vera was waiting in the living room, lounging on the sofa with a magazine. "How was your little trip?" she asked, not looking up. I stopped in the doorway, my hands curling into fists at my sides. "You won't push me out again," I said, my voice low but steady. She looked up at me, then her eyes gleaming with something sharp and cold. Slowly, she set the magazine aside and smiled. "We'll see who's left standing." I stopped reacting. That's when I became dangerous. In the days after Vera's latest threat, I let the silence do the work. I stopped answering her probing questions about where I was going, stopped explaining why I kept my bedroom door locked. I smiled when she demanded answers, and then I walked away. The old Marin would have defended herself, would have tried to reason with her. But that Marin had gotten me nowhere. By the time I sat in Tomas Reyes's office again at the end of October, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Tomas looked over the paperwork I'd gathered, the forged will, the consent forms, the joint account statements, and nodded. "You've done the right thing," he said, flipping to the last page of a bank form. "The new accounts are fully in your name now. She no longer has any access." I exhaled slowly. "She's going to notice." "She will," Thomas agreed, meeting my gaze. "But it doesn't matter anymore. She can't touch these accounts. And you need that security if we're going to see this through." I nodded, my fingers tightening around the folder of documents he'd helped me organize. "I don't want to tip her off too soon." "We won't," Tomas said. "We'll keep gathering evidence. We'll be ready when she makes her move." When I left the office, the cold air felt sharper, invigorating. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what Vera did. I was building something of my own. That night, I sat cross-legged on the floor of my bedroom, spreading papers across the carpet. I made careful copies of every forged document I'd found, labeling them by date and type. I added photos I'd quietly taken of Vera's studies, showing her carefully labeled estate and trust folders. Each page I slipped into the binder felt like a small reclaiming of power. "You'll never see this coming," I whispered to myself as I slid the last page into a plastic sleeve. The next day, I stopped by Elaine Darnell's house. She welcomed me into her warm kitchen, the scent of cinnamon and apples filling the air. Elaine handed me a small stack of letters bound with a ribbon. "I kept these," she said softly. "They're things Vera wrote to me over the years. Invitations, requests for favors, little notes. Some of them, they show how she talks about you when you're not around." I untied the ribbon and scanned the first letter. The words were polite, but laced with subtle barbs, portraying me as a dependent burden. "These could help," I said, quietly, meeting Elaine's eyes. "I hope so," she said. "I just want you to be safe, Marin." "I will be," I promised, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Back at the house, Vera was unusually quiet. She barely looked up from her crossword puzzle when I came through the door, but I could feel her watching me. I went to my room and locked the door, leaning against it for a moment. The binder of evidence sat on my desk, its weight both comforting and daunting. I knew Vera wouldn't stay still for long. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a call from Elaine. Her voice was hushed but urgent. "Maureen," she said, "I just heard something. Vera's planning a family meeting in a few days. She's telling people she wants to set the record straight." My grip on the phone tightened. "She'll never see this coming," I whispered again, more certain this time. But Elaine's next words chilled me. "She's planning a family meeting to finish the job." She thought this would be the day she erased me for good. Vera's house buzzed with the low murmur of voices when I stepped through the door on October 30th. Every relative I could remember seemed to be there, along with neighbors who had known me since I was a child. The air was heavy with the smell of coffee and polished wood, but it wasn't warm. It was suffocating. I could feel every pair of eyes turn toward me as I walked into the living room clutching my bag. Vera stood at the center of it, all radiant in a way only she could manage. Her pearl earrings caught the light as she greeted guests with warm smiles and soft laughter. She looked like the picture of maternal grace, the victim of a wayward daughter. "Marine," she said, her voice rising just enough to quiet the room. "I'm glad you decided to show up. I wasn't sure you would." I forced a polite smile and took a seat near the edge of the gathering, aware of Elaine slipping quietly into a chair behind me. Thomas stood near the back, his expression unreadable. "Thank you all for coming," Vera began, clasping her hands together like a gracious hostess. "I asked you here today because there's been some tension lately. I want to set the record straight once and for all." She turned her gaze on me with a look of sorrowful disappointment. "My daughter has been struggling," she said, addressing the crowd. "She's become distant, secretive. She's made choices that hurt this family, and I worry she's not thinking clearly." A few murmurs rippled through the group. Lori shifted uncomfortably in her seat but didn't speak. Vera continued, her voice gaining strength. "She's been trying to take things that don't belong to her. She's gone behind my back, interfered with my estate. I love her, of course I do, but she's lost sight of what's right." I kept my expression neutral, hands folded in my lap. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I watched as Vera dug her own grave, one word at a time. "She's unstable," Vera said firmly. "Greedy. And I can't allow her behavior to threaten the security of this family any longer." Elaine leaned forward, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. "You're doing the right thing. Let her talk." Vera launched into a detailed recounting of my supposed transgressions, missing money, imagined confrontations, outright lies about conversations that had never happened. Each accusation was delivered with the practiced cadence of someone who believed their own performance. Lori raised her hand timidly. "Aunt Vera, maybe we should hear Marin's side." "There is no side," Vera interrupted sharply. "She's made her choices. And from this day forward, Marin has no rights here." The words hung in the air like a verdict. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I didn't let it show. Slowly, I stood, smoothing the front of my jacket as I stepped into the center of the room. Every eye was on me now, the room hushed and expectant. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick folder I had been carrying for weeks. The weight of it was solid in my hands, heavier than fear. "You're right, Mother," I said, my voice calm and clear. "Today is the last day." She didn't realize the ambush was for her. Late afternoon light pooled across the living room, turning the polished floor into a dull mirror. The guests had rearranged themselves into a loose semicircle after my last sentence, faces tilted toward Vera the way flowers turn to a sun they think will never burn them. I set the thick folder on the coffee table and opened it with deliberate care. Paper rustled, an ordinary sound that suddenly felt like the click of a safety coming off. "I'd like you to see what I've been living with," I said, my voice steady. "Not rumors, not feelings, documents." I slid the first set across the table, copies of the loan paperwork. "You can pass them around," I added. "Please look at the signature line." A hush fell as pages moved hand to hand. Someone near the back murmured, "That doesn't look like the way she signs library forms." Lori leaned forward, squinting, then glanced at me, really looked at me for the first time in months. Vera laughed lightly, a brittle sound. "People make mistakes with handwriting all the time. You know how banks or clerks misfile, scanners blur? It's a misunderstanding." I lifted a second stack, statements from the joint account. "Then let's try numbers. Small withdrawals spread out every week, every other week. They look harmless until you add them together." I tapped the totals with my fingernail. Thousands over the past year alone. A cousin inhaled sharply. Someone's teacup clicked against its saucer. Elaine cleared her throat gently but remained quiet, waiting. From the back, Tomas stepped forward just enough that the room noticed him. He didn't posture or raise his voice. He let the facts do the work. If the signature is proven forged and there are tests for that, then the loan is fraudulent. Using a joint account to siphon funds without consent can also qualify as financial exploitation. In this state, that's not just a family issue. It's a crime. Vera's smile thinned. "Who are you, an attorney?" Tomas said. "I represent Marin." A ripple went through the room, surprise, discomfort, the uneasy realization that what had felt like gossip now had a courtroom lurking behind it. Vera tried to recover her rhythm. "I have always provided for my daughter," she announced, bright as porcelain. "If I moved funds, it was for household needs, repairs, medications, things she benefited from. She has never wanted for anything." I turned another page. The roof was replaced 8 years ago. The prescriptions are covered. "And this," I said, holding up a photo I'd taken of her neatly labeled desk folders, "is your filing system, estate. Trust, consent. Each tab matches a document where my name appears in handwriting that isn't mine." Elaine rose small and steady. "May I speak?" Vera's head snapped toward her. "Elaine, please, this is family." Elaine folded her hands. "We have been neighbors for 15 years. I've watched long enough to know what I'm saying. I've heard the way you talk to Marin when you think no one is listening. I kept letters, you wrote me notes where you complained that she was a burden, where you implied you'd found ways to keep her dependent. I brought them." She held up an envelope. "They show a pattern." The room leaned toward Elaine as if drawn by gravity. Faces softened, some flushed with embarrassment at having taken sides too quickly. Lori took the letter's lips, pressing into a line as she read. Vera's composure cracked. "You're all being manipulated," she snapped. "Marin has always been fragile. She twists things. She imagines slights. She's unstable and greedy and enough," I said. Not loud, but the word landed like a door closing. I placed one last document before the group, the newly filed, "Will the consent page," clipped to the top. "This was submitted last week. It removes me entirely, and it claims I agreed." Eyes dropped to the signature. A neighbor looked at his wife. She shook her head slowly, as if a long-delayed understanding was finally arriving. Tomas addressed the room again, crisp and clear. "We've already initiated steps to separate Marin's finances and secure her accounts. We will also be seeking a forensic handwriting analysis. If confirmed, the forgery and the coordinated withdrawals expose Vera to criminal charges and civil liability. That could include restitution penalties and, if prosecutors decide to pursue it, jail time." Silence, heavy and total. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere down the street. Inside, the evening light dimmed a shade and the room seemed to tilt away from Vera. She lunged for the narrative one more time. "You ungrateful child," she hissed at me, voice sharp enough to cut. "After everything I've sacrificed, feeding you, housing you, protecting you, this is how you repay me." By shaming me in my own home, I met her eyes. The heat that used to send me running rose and passed like a wave that finally broke and flattened. "You didn't protect me," I said softly. "You edited me out." Her face flushed. "I made you. I can still unmake you." I felt the old panic stir, then quiet. When I spoke, my voice was calm, almost gentle. "I'm done living small so you can feel big." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then chairs scraped. People didn't swarm me or clap. That isn't how small towns work, but shoulders turned. Sympathy flickered and the current shifted. Lori set Elaine's letters down with care, as if they were fragile things that could break and scatter if handled roughly. Tomas reached for the final folder, the one I hadn't opened yet. He held it like a seal. "There is one more item," he said, addressing the room. "Given what we've documented and actions already taken with the county clerk's office, some changes are effective immediately." Vera's gaze darted, searching for a faithful face and finding none. "You can't do this," she whispered. "This is my house. My name." Tomas didn't flinch. He looked to the assembled relatives, then to me. His voice stayed even the way a verdict is even, no triumph, only fact. As of today, the house and estate are legally Marin's. The house was mine now, but it felt emptier than ever. Early November sunlight slanted through the upstairs hallway, striking the polished banister in long, cold streaks. I stood there barefoot, listening to the muted thumps and rustles of Vera packing her things behind the closed door of the master bedroom. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel obligated to knock or offer to help. I just waited. She emerged carrying a half-filled box, her shoulders drawn tight beneath her cardigan. She didn't look at me as she crossed the hall, her perfume trailing faintly behind her. There were no speeches, no pleas for sympathy, just the scrape of cardboard against wood and the sound of drawers being emptied into luggage. I followed her to the doorway, leaning lightly against the frame. "Do you need anything?" I asked, my voice careful, neutral. Her jaw clenched. "No," she said, not meeting my eyes. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. The silence in the house was too deep, stretching into every corner. Even now I could sense Vera's presence woven into the walls as though she'd left fingerprints on the paint. She bent to lift another box, and something slipped from the edge, a worn envelope, its corner yellowed with age. It fluttered to the floor and landed at my feet. "I'll take that," she said quickly, but I was already bending down. The envelope was addressed to me. My name, Marin Whitmore, written in my father's unmistakable hand. The return address wasn't his, though it was a law firm postmarked more than 15 years ago. I looked up. Vera's face was pale, her lips a thin, hard line. "Give it back," she said. "Why?" My voice shook, but I held the envelope tighter. "That doesn't concern you?" She snapped, lunging forward. I stepped back. "It's addressed to me." For the first time, she looked rattled. "You don't understand what you're doing," she hissed. That letter, I turned and walked into my room, shutting the door before she could follow. My hands trembled as I tore the envelope open. Inside was a neatly folded letter from my father's attorney. My breath caught as I read. "Your father wanted to ensure you would always have security. He established a trust in your name accessible upon your 25th birthday." The enclosed documents explain the account details and the bank contact for accessing the funds. The paper slipped from my fingers. A trust fund. My father had left me something Vera had hidden all these years. I dug deeper into the envelope and found the bank information and a copy of the trust agreement. My 25th birthday had been 17 years ago. I could have had my own life, my own independence. The betrayal struck like a physical blow. She hadn't just taken my money or my name off a will, she had stolen my father's final gift to me, ensuring I remained tethered to her, dependent and small. I pressed the letter against my chest, my heart pounding in my ears. Outside my door, I could hear Vera moving again, her boxes scraping across the floor, but she didn't knock. She didn't ask for the envelope back. I stared at the papers spread across my bed, a bitter taste rising in my mouth. What else had she taken from me that I never knew existed? That letter changed everything. She hadn't just stolen my future, she'd stolen my past. By mid-November, the edges of Vermont's trees had gone bare, and the air had the brittle bite of approaching winter. I sat in Tomas Reyes's office, clutching the letter from my father, my pulse thudding, as though the paper might dissolve in my hands if I didn't hold it tightly enough. Tomas read the letter silently a second time, then lowered it slowly. "Marin, this is significant. If what's in here is true, it means there was a trust in your name all along." I nodded, my throat dry. I turned 25, 17 years ago. I should have had access then. She must have hidden it from me. Thomas leaned back, exhaling sharply. "The first thing we need to do is confirm whether the trust still exists. If it doesn't, we trace where the money went. We'll start with the bank listed here." 2 hours later, we sat across from a stone-faced bank manager in a glass-walled office. The woman's keyboard clacked quietly as she pulled up the trust records on her screen. She looked from the monitor to me, then to Thomas. "The account was liquidated 15 years ago," she said matter-of-factly. I gripped the edge of the chair. "Liquidated by who?" The manager hesitated, then turned the screen slightly toward us. The transaction history was a long list of withdrawals that ended in a single large transfer to another account. My name wasn't on it. Tomas pointed to the recipient line. "This is Vera's account," he said grimly. "She took it all." The words felt like a blow to the chest. I stared at the numbers, trying to comprehend just how much had been stolen. It wasn't just the money, it was the life I might have lived, the independence my father had tried to ensure. "Why didn't the bank contact me?" I asked, my voice cracking. "They would have sent notice to the address on file," the manager said gently. "Your mother must have controlled the mail at that time." I closed my eyes. Of course she had. Back at Tomas's office, the folder of evidence grew heavier with every new page. Tomas began drafting a complaint, his expression set. "This isn't just financial exploitation anymore," he said. "We're talking about misappropriation of trust funds, forgery, and possibly perjury if she lied to the probate court." I sat across from him, my hands curled into fists in my lap. "She made sure I was dependent on her," I said quietly. "Every decision I made, every step I didn't take, it was all because she took this away." Thomas nodded. "We'll hold her accountable. We'll file in both civil and criminal court. Once the suit is served, she won't be able to run from this." I watched as he signed the first page of the draft lawsuit, a sense of clarity settling over me like a steadying weight. I thought about the years Vera had stolen, the humiliations I'd endured, the way she had convinced everyone I was fragile and small. "I'm not letting her walk away this time," I said. Tomas looked up, his gaze steady. "She could face prison for this, Marin. Are you ready to go that far?" She wasn't going down quietly. She wanted to drag me with her. By late November, the air in town felt sharper than ever, as though every glance carried a blade. Vera had gone back on the offensive, and she was relentless. I overheard whispers at the grocery store. "Did you hear Marin kicked her sick mother out of her own house?" At the hardware store, a neighbor muttered to another. "She stole her mother's inheritance, apparently." Can you imagine? It didn't matter that the truth was out there for anyone willing to look. Vera knew that in a small town, perception could drown fact. I tried to hold my head high as I left the post office one afternoon, but I didn't make it far before Lori stepped into my path. Her arms were crossed, her eyes blazing. "Marin." "What are you doing?" she demanded. "You've humiliated her, taken everything from her, and now you're dragging this through the courts." "She's your mother. She's been lying to everyone," I said calmly. "She's the one who took what wasn't hers. She stole the trust my father left me. Do you even know that Lori faltered but recovered quickly? She told me you're exaggerating, that you're being vindictive." Before I could respond, Elaine appeared from behind Lori. She stepped between us, her voice soft but firm. "Lori, stop. You've heard Vera's story now. Maybe it's time you consider that Marin's might be the truth. You don't have to take sides, but you do need to back off." Lori's face reddened. She opened her mouth, then closed it, and finally stalked away without another word. Elaine turned to me, her expression full of quiet concern. "Don't let her rattle you," she said. "I won't," I said, though my hands were shaking. That night I drove out to where Vera was staying with an old family friend. The lawsuit papers sat heavy in the passenger seat, their presence both terrifying and necessary. When Vera opened the door, she looked at me as though I were a stranger. "What do you want?" she snapped. I held the envelope out to her. "These are for you. The lawsuit is filed. You'll get the court date soon." Her eyes flashed with fury. She snatched the papers from my hand and tore them open. When she saw the copy of the letter from my father's attorney, she let out a guttural sound of rage. You think this proves anything? She screamed. She ripped the letter into pieces, scattering them like confetti at our feet. You'll never get a cent of his money. I looked at the shreds fluttering across the porch, then back at her. My voice was low, unshaken. Then I'll let the court decide. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and final chances. Late November sunlight filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting pale rectangles on the floor as I sat at the plaintiff's table. My hands rested on the folder of evidence Tomas and I had meticulously built over the past weeks. Across the aisle, Vera sat stiff-backed beside her attorney, lips pressed into a defiant line. She looked smaller somehow, her sharp edges dulled by the weight of the trial, but I knew better than to underestimate her. Judge Fletcher entered the room, his black robe sweeping behind him. Court is now in session, he announced, and the bailiff's voice echoed the call to order. Tomas rose to begin our case. He laid out the timeline with surgical precision, the forged signatures on estate documents, the siphoned funds from joint accounts, the trust my father had created that Vera had liquidated years ago. He presented bank records and affidavits from handwriting experts. He called Elaine as a witness, and she testified softly but firmly about the years she'd watched Vera isolate me and manipulate the people around us. I took the stand next. The courtroom's wooden pews were filled with neighbors and relatives, their faces somber as they listened. I told the truth, the sacrifices I had made, the way I'd been erased from my own life, and the moment I realized my father's last gift had been stolen from me. Vera's attorney cross-examined me, but I stayed calm. I didn't flinch when he suggested I was vindictive, didn't falter when he insinuated I was exaggerating my mother's actions. I simply answered the questions with facts and let the evidence speak for itself. The defendant is ordered to repay the full amount of the trust fund with interest and is permanently barred from accessing any portion of the estate. The forged documents will be voided and any remaining assets will remain under Marin Whitmore's sole control. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Beside me, Tomas squeezed my shoulder. Across the aisle, Vera slumped in her chair, the fight draining from her body. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and hollow. "You'll regret this when I'm gone," she whispered. But her words no longer held power. The bailiff stepped forward, ready to escort her from the courtroom as the judge's gavel struck. I watched her rise and shuffle toward the door, shoulders bent under the weight of the verdict. For the first time in years, I felt nothing but release. She left town without saying goodbye, and for once I didn't chase after her. Early December brought a thin dusting of snow that melted by mid-morning, leaving the ground damp and the air brisk. I stood on the porch of the house, my house now, and let the cold sting my cheeks. For years, I'd lived here like a ghost, walking on eggshells, afraid to disturb the walls Vera had built around me. But the house felt different now. It was mine, in a way it had never been before. Inside, the sound of hammering echoed faintly from the upstairs hallway. I'd hired a contractor to take down the dated wallpaper Vera loved so much. The pale blue walls beneath were scuffed and scarred, but they were a blank slate. One room at a time, I was reclaiming the space. I moved through the house, slowly pausing to appreciate the small changes I'd already made: the bright curtains in the kitchen, the cozy armchair I'd picked out for the living room, the framed charcoal sketches I'd hung along the staircase. For the first time in decades, the house reflected who I was, rather than who Vera wanted me to be. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Elaine stood there, bundled in a wool coat, a small tin of cookies in her hands. "I thought you might like a little company," she said, her smile warm as always. I stepped aside to let her in. "You didn't have to bring anything," I said, but the smell of cinnamon and butter made my chest ache with gratitude. "I wanted to," she replied, setting the tin on the counter. "I also wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. You've been through so much, Maureen, and you didn't just survive, you changed your life." Her words caught me off guard. For so long, I'd measured myself by how much I'd endured, not by what I'd built. "I couldn't have done it without you," I admitted. You could have, Elaine said gently, but I'm glad I could help. After she left, I bundled up and stepped into the backyard. The soil was cold but soft enough to work with. I knelt in the garden bed, fingers numb as I pressed small packets of seeds into the earth. Lavender, sage, and daisies, plants my mother never allowed because she said they were messy, wild things. As I worked, I thought about the art class I'd signed up for at the community center. I thought about the sketchbook I'd dug out of a dusty box in the attic and the quiet thrill I'd felt when I put pencil to paper for the first time in years. This was my life now. Not perfect, not easy, but mine. I brushed the dirt from my hands and stood looking over the small garden with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in decades. I finally understood disappearing wasn't the end. It was the beginning of my own life. The long shadow of betrayal had finally lifted, leaving behind a life rebuilt on strength and hard-won independence. Vera's fall was a reminder that no web of lies could stand forever against the steady force of truth. Justice may arrive late, but when it comes, it resounds like a final chord that echoes for a lifetime. Sometimes one act of courage is all it takes to change a future that once felt stolen. If you connected with this story, please like, share, and subscribe. Comment 1 if you felt the same, or 2 if you think it could have ended differently.